I guess we begin. Just for those people online that are listening in, we've been waiting for some in-person attendees, but so far it's all just you guys online, so we'll just get going, I think. My name's Dee Dee. I'm Open Scholarship Librarian here at University of Saskatchewan, and my colleague Kate is here as well. She's a copyright coordinator for the library, or for the whole university, actually. So today we want to give you an introduction and like a broad overview of publishing in general, and some specific topics in publishing and copyright. And so I'll handle the publishing part, and Kate can come in near the end and do the copyright part. And so if you want to put any questions or comments in the chat, we're monitoring that, and we're happy to answer any questions along the way. And we have a few parts where we stop and wait for some questions too. Okay, so we'll start with the land acknowledgement. We gather here today. We acknowledge we're on Treaty 6 territory in the homeland of the Métis. We pay our respect to the First Nation and Métis ancestors of this place, and reaffirm our relationship with one another. And like I mentioned today, there's a lot of detail we can get in when we talk about publishing. But when we're first starting to talk about publishing with undergraduate students, it's best to do sort of an overview to give you more context about publishing in general, and that involves sort of the history and purpose of what scientific journals or scholarly journals are and what they're useful for, and that leads into sort of a discussion about what the dysfunction is in the current market, which explains a lot of the problems that we currently have with access to the journal content, and which again leads us into the big topic of open access publishing, which is my specialty here at the library. And so publishing can be very discipline specific. And so that's why we don't get into specific details about that, but it's that sort of thing is best to maybe talk with your supervisor about how this plays out in your particular discipline. So we'll talk mainly about these broad topics, and that will give you a good basis for understanding some of how the journal situation functions. So we're mainly, when we're talking about publishing today, we're talking about journal publishing. Book or monograph publishing is quite a different thing. But typically, many academics focus on the journal publishing market. And copyright is really essential for authors to understand as well. So we'll talk a lot about that too. Okay, so a good basis is starting with the history and like the purpose of journals. But even before that, I just want to give a really basic background into what journals are. It's something that I don't remember I ever received when I was an undergrad student. It took me a while to figure out on my own what journals were. So I'm sure you're all much smarter than I was as an undergrad, but just to make sure we're all on the same page, journals are serial or periodical publications. So meaning they're like magazines, they're published on a periodic basis every week or 2 weeks or every month. Typically, I guess, conventionally, that's been the case. They're mostly online nowadays, of course, and online means that you can publish whenever. So most journals, or many journals now, are sort of transitioning to a continuous publication. So they're not even that so much a serial or periodical like magazines anymore. But this is the basis for their organization. So you might hear things like issues and volumes, and that's because you'll see in the photo here, they came out in the print days as these kind of like magazine type things on their serial or periodical basis. And then at the end of the year, or however long, the library would then put them physically into a volume. And so that's where those words come from, that when you're navigating the voluminous journal literature out there, that's where those terms come from, of issues and volumes, even though it doesn't really make as much sense in the online versions. And there, like I just said, there's a lot of journal literature out there, tens or even hundreds of thousands of journal titles, and we don't have an accurate number of how many journals are out there because they're constantly being started or stopped, or merged or split, or, it's really hard to get a good handle on the number, but it is in the upper tens of thousands, probably. And conventionally, these were subscription things that people would subscribe to. Now there's so many, of course, individuals, typically, if they do subscribe, is to one or two titles, or they might get it through their scholarly society. But typically, they're mostly subscribed to by academic libraries when this is our role to provide access to these things for our researchers. They're typically known as primary sources, more library jargon, but typically just meaning that this is the first time this information is communicated. So these are typically research articles written by academics, scholars, and so they're often highly technical. Because they're written for an audience of peers. So they're scientists writing for scientists, or scholars for scholars. So they're writing for people who are already familiar with the topic, typically. These are typically peer reviewed. You've probably heard that term there a number of times. And so this image here gives an overview of the typical journal article publishing process. Like I said, in each discipline, there's some variation here, and some of the details might be different, but this is largely the case for many journals. So the scientists or scholars study something, they write up their results, they send it into a journal of their choice, depending on the scope or the topic. They'll choose a title that seems right, and that journal editor receives the article and decides whether it is within the scope, does a sort of an initial desk review, I guess they might call it, editorial review, and then sends it out to those peers. So these are other scholars, scientists who study similar things, and that can provide the editor with an assessment of the quality, I guess, quality and scare quotes, because that's a bit subjective, but these are the most these people are probably the best to determine whether this article is quality or not. Okay, so there might be some back and forth there with the peer reviewers' suggestions or opinions, and then the scientists can make some revisions. So there's a bit of back and forth, and then the article comes out. So this is all to say that there is some quality control going on here. The details will vary depending on the actual journal itself. One interesting piece here is that authors and peer reviewers are not paid for all this labor. This is highly specialized work that typically in other fields of work, like law or medicine or whatever, you would be paid. If you have that high technical expertise, you would definitely charge probably hundreds of dollars an hour for that kind of work. In this case, authors and peer reviewers are not paid, and we'll talk about that shortly in the history section, because this explains a lot of the problems that we get into with the current market. And so conventional subscription journals, authors don't pay to publish either, so they can submit their article for free. And this is changing a bit to support open access publishing nowadays. So we'll get into all of that. The other interesting thing about the history of the journal is that they have been around for hundreds of years. So the very first one here, Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society, established in 1665, which is wild to think of. Philosophical Transactions, you might think it sounds like a philosophy journal, but back in those days, they didn't have the word scientist, I don't think. So they would call themselves natural philosophers. This is a science journal. So the Royal Society, first scholarly society in the world, so a number of people that were interested in these topics and had some expertise or knowledge about them would gather together, and it's like a club. They would exchange information and talk to each other about their interests. Interestingly enough, this journal is still publishing today. So you might recognize, here's a couple screenshots. It has split into two sections, one like a physical science section and one a biological science section. And so interesting, it's still running today. But these journals solved several problems for these early scientists. And so some of them might be obvious. Like I mentioned, in those early scholarly societies, people would get together and like verbally discuss, but then not everybody was geographically located, so they would often write letters. So a lot of extra work to write letters back and forth to everybody, all the individual people. So it became more efficient to send the letter to a person who was designated as an editor, gather them together and put them in a common publication that could be sent out to everybody. So it was a matter of dissemination. It was more efficient to communicate among these early scholars. The other thing is establishing priority, really important topic for these early scholars too, because they wanted to really establish, I was the person who came up with this idea first. If they wrote it down and it was in this recognized journal, new journal, then that would establish their priority. It's just also called registration, you know, some of these terms. This could then allow them to collect some kind of reward. And so nowadays we would say like this, the kind of rewards that come from this kind of recognition or priority is like a building of their academic reputation or a reputation as a professor or scholar, which would get them their job, their tenure, their promotion, their grants, you know, that sort of thing. So scientists and scholars need to publish in order to get that. Building the knowledge base sort of makes sense. This gets into some of the library role in preserving and archiving all this literature. So you can imagine these volumes would start accumulating. We need to archive them, preserve them so that we continually build upon that knowledge that's shared. We're not, again, it's about efficiency. We're not recreating the wheel. If a scientist wants to do an experiment, they can, you know, look at that literature and see if it's been done before. If it has, then they can build upon it instead of reproducing that effort. Or they can test it and confirm that that result is accurate. And so the validation certification, we talked about peer review already. That's what this is. It's a quality control. This came a bit later, so those early philosophical transactions weren't peer reviewed in the same way as they are today. This sort of started up more in the last 100 years or so, I'd say. Okay. So, and, you know, in the early days, there was a few tens of journals or something, and then they really exploded. Right around the time of the 1950s or so, after the Second World War, a lot of Western governments really invested in research. Universities expanded. So therefore, lots of research was being produced and published. It kind of got out of control that the scholarly societies couldn't really keep up. It wasn't something that they could manage, I guess, the amount of it. So lots of journals came out and commercial publishers started taking over all of these journals. And they realized that this was quite lucrative. And so they started their own journals too. And so now we have this big expansion of lots and lots of journals and consolidation now too, meaning that all these big publishers, there are 5, what we call an oligopoly of big publishers that are just sort of buying up, I guess, all the smaller publications. And so they publish this article here, talks a lot about how these 5 big publishers are dominating the market. That's the oligopoly piece, and then setting prices and control over this work. Okay. So this brings us to this dysfunction, and really important for you as new scientists and researchers to understand this dysfunction, because it will impact you as authors for sure. So just to highlight sort of what I said, it was pretty lucrative, this market. This is sort of meant to illustrate how lucrative. Since there's no one in the audience that I can test, I'll just say, like, Elsevier probably is the one that's less familiar to the people out in the audience, but since you're in your upper years, probably might have come across Science Direct when you're accessing articles. This is Science Direct, is a platform that Elsevier owns. It's the largest scholarly publisher in the world. And then we have Google, which of course everybody knows, very, very profitable company, as is Esso, oil and gas company, oil and gas, very profitable, especially right now, making lots and lots of profit. I'm sure you can see where I'm leading here. Elsevier is actually the most profitable of all these companies. And this is data from 2022, but this is data that is repeated every year, year over year. Not just Elsevier, but all the different oligopoly of publishers. On the left there in the pink, you'll see those are the academic publishers. There's only like a couple other bars that maybe are higher in the profit margins. So Elsevier, Taylor and Francis, Springer Nature, Wiley make more profit than what are these? Some of the financial companies like JP Morgan Chase. So Elsevier makes more profit than Microsoft. Alphabet is Google, and then Apple, of course. All of those scholarly publishers every year typically make more profit than Apple. Then the orange is all the oil and gas energy markets. So this is just to illustrate for you the amount of revenue that's coming in for these scholarly publishers. And that is why they maintain such a hold of control over this work. And it's very, very hard to change the system because it's very lucrative for them, of course. Just to make some sort of practical or concrete numbers here for you. These are some of the prices that the library here has paid for access to this literature on your behalf. I mean, this isn't nearly all of what we spend, but this is a small snippet that we've released publicly. And you'll see the red circle there is the Science Direct, like I mentioned, Elsevier's collection of journals. There's about 2,000 journals in that collection, let's say. This is what we paid for that 1 year of access, we as a library here at Saskatoon. So every library is paying something like that every year, basically. So 1.6 million back then, and that was 2020. It goes up every year, price inflation, higher than the typical rate of inflation. That's what this screenshot says. So not only is it expensive, it's the costs rise more than typical rates of inflation. Why are they so high? Okay, so I hope I've made the point that they're high. They're high for this reason. I've hinted at this already. So universities typically, especially in Canada here, I guess we get our money, mainly our operating money from the province, from provincial governments, right? So that's taxpayer money. Also from students, of course, so tuition money. Researchers apply to the federal government and to other organizations to get money, like in grants to fund their research. So that comes into the university too. If it's from one of the federal agencies, you might have heard of the Tri-Agency, 3 big funding agencies. They get their money, of course, from taxpayers too. So this is public money coming into the university primarily. This pays faculty their salaries and funds their research to report on the articles. So that is why when they submit to these journals, they don't expect to be paid. They're already getting paid for their day job and for teaching. And it's just the tradition, like we talked about in the history. That's why I wanted to go through the history. This is a historical remnant of the past that, it wasn't the scholarly society's need or purpose, I guess, to make money off of their publications. It was a service to their community. And so faculty still today, researchers still today, see it as a service to their colleagues. They submit on their articles and don't expect to be paid. They provide their expert peer review and editorial labor often and don't expect to be paid because it's a service to their colleagues and peers. And that's why the publishers are able to make so much money, because of course any other industry would pay for their content or their resource, their raw materials, whatever. This is a really weird market where the companies just don't pay for their raw materials. And they don't pay for their expert, like quality control labor either. So this is why they're able to charge what they charge and make so much money. So this is just basically a summary. The other part of this, of course, is that each journal is kind of a mini monopoly, right? So articles are unique. I mean, there could be other similar articles, but if you need that particular article that communicates results of a particular study, you need to go to that journal that published it, right? And so that's what I mean. It's kind of, they have a hold on the market in a monopoly that way. And they kind of, I don't know what the better term here is, but libraries are kind of middlemen. And so they're paying on behalf of our campus community for access, which means that the end consumers, I suppose, faculty, students, researchers, whoever's reading the articles, don't often see that transaction, which is why I want to tell you about all of this today. So typically, the readers in the previous system well, typically readers don't pay, like I said. Academic libraries pay the subscribe on their behalf. So the publishers will charge what the market will bear, not necessarily what the true cost is. So there's little market pressure. So it's a dysfunctional market, basically. And then, you know, often when I describe this situation to people outside of academia, they're like, you academics are supposed to be smart. How come you're letting this happen? You know, because definitely authors and researchers are very aware of this, but they're caught in this system too, because of this incentive for career progression. So they need to publish in these journals, like I mentioned, for their renewal, tenure, promotion, hiring, merit, etc. grants. Often they target the prestige journals. There are certain journals that are prestigious, and that will ensure that they make these career progressions. And it's very difficult, as you might be aware, to change anything in academia because we're often tied to our traditions. And we are all kind of like herding cats, I've often said. It's hard to get everyone to agree on something. So, and it's a global system too. So that's why it's very hard to change this. So if I pause here for now, that's a lot of information. And I can't see you, so I'm hoping if you have questions, you'll put them in the chat. I was hoping that you'd think about sort of what are the broader impacts. All this literature is out there, but it often has paywalls on it because academic libraries would subscribe, but of course that's only, those subscriptions are only available to their affiliated users and not necessarily to people out in the general public, or even people like practitioners, doctors, nurses, you know, coaches, physical therapists, whoever might be able to put that information to use. They don't necessarily always have access. I think we would want them to have access. If it was a doctor treating me, I would hope they would have access to the literature and know the most recent results. Not necessarily the case.
Molly posted a comment. Sorry to interrupt. Molly posted a comment. Paywalls often lead people to use AI or non-university approved resources for their work for sake of ease, which is an interesting, now with how AI is taking over all our spheres of life.
Yeah, a whole nother big topic that we're talking about a lot in this area now, definitely. And so AI, these big commercial publishers are now, because we'll talk about a little bit about copyright later, but often when the authors are giving their literature over to these publishers, the publishers are asking for full transfer of copyright, which means they have full control over that work, which means that they can now sell all that work to these AI companies to train their bots on. And that's a big issue that people are talking about now. And so good and bad. I mean, that will maybe make that content that the AI is trained on more accurate and reliable. So that might be a positive. The researchers themselves aren't getting any benefit from it necessarily because they're typically not getting cited by that bot. It's just all a bunch of information that's being consumed by the bot and spit back out necessarily. So there's all sorts of topics we could get into here.
I 2 points. this ties up with other sessions we had from the library with Angie, who was hitting the same point a lot. Don't pay for articles, people.
Yeah.
Contact your librarian. If you don't know who they are or where to go, send an email to undergraduate.research. Don't feel bad because it's not like you would be deprived, like the author wouldn't be getting that money because like you saw the system, it's
Yeah,
awful.
right.
And we don't want you guys to spend any more money than you already spend on your education. So there are ways that the library can help you get that resource without you spending money. And then the second one is more like a personal comment because I'm originally from Brazil and I did some research as an undergraduate in Brazil. And it was really, really hard to, even though I read in other languages, it was really hard to access knowledge outside of my country because we couldn't afford it. Our libraries couldn't afford the same contracts that the global north can. So it's just interesting how, you know, it impacts all of us, but some of us more, because of how, you know, society and economies and all of those things are set up. And it really damages the knowledge production
Yes.
in so many levels. I had a very tough experience just finding information to do basic research. It wasn't very.
It's a huge
Average.
problem, access to information. Thank you for raising that. That's a great segue. Because it really creates this term like that we call information privilege. So some people have more access to knowledge than others because of this market control of the literature by large profit-driven companies. So it's in their I don't know, it's important for them to make money because that's what they are. They're profit-driven commercial companies. So they put up those walls, but that is not in alignment with the values or the needs of science or society, right? So we want most of this, we want this literature to be as available as much as possible to as many people as possible around the world who can build upon it, learn from it. And so that's where open access came from. Now, of course, it's being co-opted, of course, also by these companies. But the initial impetus was exactly to solve that problem. And open access literature, like a really sort of brief definition, I guess, it can get really complicated, but the internet, online electronic information sharing is what makes this possible. Because in the print days, of course, there are real costs, I guess. There are real costs in the electronic system, but in the print days, of course, you have paper, ink, delivery, like shipping, like those costs you can't get around. In the electronic days, you can get around a lot of that. There are still costs in the system. I don't mean to say that there isn't, but they should be much reduced and we should be able to share more easily electronically, right? Without those barriers of shipping and everything. So open access means it's always free of charge to readers as well. Sometimes to fund that system, there may be charges for authors as well. And that's where these commercial publishers have then come in and sort of found a new revenue model and charging authors. What's nice about open access too is that it's free of most of these copyright restrictions. It's typically always, you may have seen the Creative Commons, some of those symbols. So you always want to attribute your cite your source, right? So attribute the author. And so the CC BY means that the author still holds the copyright or that license, I suppose, and gives you other rights to use that literature, but they still want to be cited, and that's reasonable. We want to do that anyway in academia. But otherwise, we want that literature to be as freely available and reused as possible. And so lots and lots of benefits like we just talked about. You can share this broadly with more audiences. It builds trust, a public trust. It removes barriers so it's more equitable. And this accelerates research advancements, I guess you could say. People who create policy in government can have access and create better policies. There's all sorts of good reasons to do this. And even the academic themselves, they can increase their impact if more people are reading it, and that's important for their career progression as well. So yeah, this kind of summarizes about what I was just saying. You can involve more people around the world with this kind of literature. If more people have access, they can build upon it, learn from it. There are still problems, like I said. So it solves the access problem for readers. So readers can access, and that's a good thing. So open access has really grown, but it doesn't solve this dysfunctional system because the commercial publishers have really co-opted this additional revenue stream. So now they can charge authors the unreasonable prices to submit their works instead of charging the readers, right? So it's kind of flipped. And so this is some research that has been going on to track some of these article processing charges and how much has been spent to these big commercial publishers. So it's not all good, but there's still progress and hope. A lot of articles are out there now, and so that's good. And libraries and people like me are doing a lot of advocacy and awareness raising to advance sort of more equitable open access and sharing options. And there are models that do not charge authors, and they're often supported by libraries or by scholarly societies, that sort of thing. So it's more equitable that way. And you can certainly share your research in things like Harvest, which is our institutional repository. And certainly this slide talks about how a lot of the workers on these journals who are scholars, who are contributing their volunteer labor, are now starting to walk out from or resign en masse, from some of these editorial boards, and then start up one of these more equitable or ethical open access journals instead of being tied to one of these big commercial publishers. So a little bit of the practical stuff, there's like two routes to open access. I won't go too much into this. You typically think of the journal route where you publish in an open access journal. Could be a hybrid journal, which makes your individual article open access in an otherwise closed journal. So lots of detail we can get into here, but not necessary at the moment. But there's also this repository route, and this is what people don't tend to know too much about.
Hi, everybody.
There it is. I see you there.
Fun fact about me, if there's a session involving technology that I'm participating in, technology will all break. So we may be switching over to our backup laptop here. Just give us 1 minute. Yeah.
The owls. So.
So you wanna present from yours now?
Yeah. Yeah, I think I'm just gonna present from here, or Dee Dee can, I can do Dee Dee's last couple slides and then start on the copyright stuff.
In the owl, if you want.
Oh, okay. Oops.
I'm gonna share my screen.
Here's I have a visit with the IT folks.
Hey.
This is what we see.
Oh, that's what, okay, there we go, perfect. Okay. Onward. Good, Dee.
Oh, I'm.
I'll let Kate take over.
Feels like I'm having flashbacks to COVID again. Anyway, thanks for sticking with us, folks. Give me a thumbs up if you can see the screen. It looks like it's fine, but okay. So as DB was saying, there are these two kind of main pathways for open publishing for journal articles. Benefits of green open access, that repository route, include that it is free, whereas in the gold route, often, like on the last slide or a couple slides ago, Dee Dee was showing you, sometimes it can cost $10,000 to publish your article open access in a journal. And part of the system is if your research grant funder requires that you publish open access and you end up publishing in a journal with these really, really high, they call them article processing charges, but it's paid to publish open. You can kind of end up trapped with this bill. So we, with USask's Harvest repository and the support from library staff for that, it's sort of the route we like to advocate for and can help with. Right, free and legal, but yeah, sometimes there's sharing restrictions about which version of your article, if it's a journal article, you're allowed to share. It's fairly common that the publisher won't allow sharing of the final published version of an article that has their like branding on it, so they still end up the copyright owner for that. So it's always a good idea to keep your earlier draft versions of your articles, like the version that you initially submit to the journal, your original version, as well as the draft version that's accepted by the publisher after you make edits, if need be, after the peer review process. Okay, yeah, so there is an open access journal at USask that's sort of run for and run by undergraduate students largely. the USurge Journal. It's a diamond open access journal, which means there are no, it's free to publish in as well as free to read. There are graduate students and faculty members who do the peer review for USurge. So this is a great kind of starting place for your research and publishing journey if you're interested. There is also an online directory of open access journals. And these journals are like vetted for quality. This tool is so great for being able to filter to find open access journals that are free to publish in, to find journals that kind of let you retain your copyright and archive in repositories. I think they,
You
yeah,
can filter those.
you can filter those results. So it's a great tool there. Oops. See my pop-up. Yeah, and you can always, talk to the librarian for your subject area about these research related things. Okay, and yeah, again, I mentioned Harvest is the USask, and Dee Dee talked as well about the USask institutional repository where theses and dissertations ultimately live, as well as where I believe your posters for the SURE program are going to be archived as well. There are other open repositories at a lot of other institutions, as well as some that are subject based. But like I said, yeah, Harvest, there's USask kind of staff support. And it's both about access and also about preservation. So it's will support long-term digital preservation of research. Anything else about Harvest? I'll talk about it a little bit more too.
Yeah, I think
Copyright.
Emily, coordinator, presented an earlier SURE session, so that was probably recorded, so you could see her presentation about how to put your posters in there if you like.
Right. Okay, so for the copyright info today, you'll see we don't have a ton of time left, and I was never mind, copyright can be kind of stressful and overwhelming. So all I want to do today is provide you with a little bit of copyright info that may be relevant for your SURE project, but also that you can apply and think about in future research. Okay. True or false? So Dee Dee touched on this already, but articles or other things that I publish open access won't be protected by copyright anymore. Feel free to share in the chat. What do we think the answer is? Yeah, so this is false. Open access licenses, if you use like a Creative Commons license or something, that doesn't mean that you are giving away your copyright to the material. You're still the copyright owner. Even if you use an open license or make your material openly available online. You are, so the way that a lot of copyright laws work, including Canadian law, is that you are the copyright owner legally of material that you create kind of as soon as you create it. There's no need to register material, like to register with an official body. You can do that, but you don't have to in order for your work to be protected by copyright, and you are automatically the copyright owner. One exception is if you are employed and you're creating material like in the course of your job, then your employer may own it, but generally you own something that you create as soon as you do it. So this includes material that you create in your role as a student at USask, like your essays that you write or assignments, and your SURE poster as well. You can, so as the copyright owner, it's your right to choose sort of the copyright status, the way I think of it, of your work. And so you would have the right to apply a Creative Commons license to it. The way I sometimes think about Creative Commons and these licenses, I think about copyright sometimes on kind of a spectrum. So materials aren't necessary, like, so you will have seen on various, in books or on web pages, the term all rights reserved, likely with a copyright symbol. So that's the full kind of maximum copyright protection on one end of the spectrum. On the other end of the spectrum, there is sort of copyright free, public domain, we call it, where copyright is expired. And then Creative Commons licenses exist on a spectrum kind of in the middle of those two things. And they have different elements you can choose from. For example, if you're okay with somebody using your material or distributing it, but only for non-commercial purposes, you can select a license that allows that. So, for example, Dee Dee and I have licensed our slides today, which we will be sharing with you under the CC BY Creative Commons license. And that allows for you or anybody to make copies, distribute this however you like, use the material as long as we're cited. And that little BY element is in all of the Creative Commons licenses, which Dee Dee was talking about. Just being acknowledged or cited is important generally. Okay, when you submit your poster to Harvest, there are a few things that in the Harvest sort of copyright license or permission that you'll be asked to let library staff do, including make your poster openly available online in Harvest, convert it to another file format in the future if need be for the sake of preservation. And those are the main two things. You're not transferring your copyright to the university or the library or anything. You are still the copyright owner of that. None of your rights, creator rights, will be taken from you. It's just the permission kind of to make your work available there and to preserve it in the future. All right, if you are interested in using, let's say, an image like a photograph or a diagram or figure created by somebody else, say you found something online or in a journal, and you want to use it in your poster, there's some copyright considerations for doing that. Text like short quotes and things is generally fine. This is a common practice, right? To be able to include short quotations that you cite in what material that you're creating, whether it's something written or a poster. But images are a little bit different because a picture, the saying, a picture speaks 1,000 words, and a lot of images on their own, like a short quote is considered a small part of a whole piece of material, but an image on its own is sort of a full copyrighted work. So here's kind of a few questions you can go through to determine if you can go ahead and use it or if you might need to get copyright permission first. Okay, so I'm going to talk about each of these steps just in a little more detail. The first step is sort of trying to determine who the copyright owner is and what the copyright status again of this image is. Like maybe there's an existing license, like a Creative Commons license or something that would let you reuse the image. If there's not, it may be possible, again, depending on what you're working with, for you to kind of recreate the image in your own way or make your own image that shares the same information instead of copying the original image directly. And then there's a section in our copyright law that you may be able to use if you really need the image in here for scholarly purposes and you need to use it. It's more than just decorative, it's kind of more than just an example, but you're engaging with it. So I'll talk a bit about that too. Right, so trying to find the copyright statement near an image Sometimes it will appear right with an image, but if it's in a journal article, it's likely if there's no specific copyright statement near the image, then it's likely whoever the copyright owner of the whole article is. And again, look for if it says all rights reserved, or maybe there's a Creative Commons license or other info there. Yeah, there are a lot of Creative Commons materials and image sources. I put a link here to the main Creative Commons search website that you can use to try and find openly licensed material. But even for some things that are all rights reserved copyright, the university library's license agreements includes some wording, some of the agreements for some journals allowing use of a sort of small portion from journals for research purposes. And we have a page, this figure reuse page linked here, where you can check out which agreements, like for which publishers allow this, and you can use an image from a journal article for those specific ones. If you happen to be working with government materials, there's a kind of the Canadian government has their own special copyright license, Crown copyright, that is significantly more lenient than all rights reserved copyright for non-commercial scholarly uses. And looking for other terms of use, this is something I'm very happy to help with. It's another, if there's one thing that you remember today, I want to kind of let everybody know, like, I'm really happy to help with any copyright questions or obstacles. If you come up against stuff, I'm here to take the copyright weight off your shoulders. So please feel free to reach out. Our contact info is at the end, because I know this, can be daunting, and very happy to help. Yeah, so creating the image again in your own way, if you can take your own photo, kind of make your own diagram, then you are the copyright owner of that, even if it's based on an existing image. If it looks, different enough and you made it your own, then you just need to cite the original image. And lastly, we could do, and this is again something I could help with, do a fair dealing analysis. And if there are no other good options, there's a part of Canadian copyright law that under circumstances can support using material without having to get copyright permission for certain purposes. And I'm sure we're getting short on time, so I won't get into it too much, but again, this is another thing my office can help with. And this last slide here is just sort of the key steps. And if you do get to a point where you think, no, I need to get permission from the copyright owner to use this. Sometimes this is the case also with test and measurement tools. I wanted to mention, often copyright permission is needed, especially if you want to republish those in an article. So if you've identified the copyright owner, contact them in writing. Getting copyright permissions or licenses in writing is important, so you have a copy, like something for proof of permission in writing. And if the copyright owner is a journal or publisher, some of them may have a dedicated permissions email address or even an online form that you can use to submit a permission request. There's also an online copyright clearance center that a lot of these publishers, especially the big academic publishers, have hired to manage their copyright permissions and licenses. So Copyright Clearance Center website is useful for academia. And if it's not there, you can also just email a journal or publisher with your request. Again, with big publishers, it can be hard to hear back. So, but yeah, that's the overview of the sort of permissions process. And often, if you're publishing with a journal or publisher, they will want you to get permission or, yeah, for using others' images or things.
1 minute.
Okay,
Done.
yes, we did it, folks. Here is, okay, I'll come back to, so you can see us both. This is just our contact information here. If you have any follow-up questions, and it sounds like we have a minute, if anybody has any last minute questions here.
Technical
here now.
problems took away our
Yes.
question and answer time.
Always technical problem. If you think of something later, again, we'll make sure to get these slides to you. And thank you for coming, for joining us.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Dee Dee. I'm sorry about the technical issue.
It happens.
It does, yes. It was answered.